Eliza walked with her head down, the envelope in her hand feeling heavier than it should. The paper inside was smooth, official-looking, with gold lettering that said, "Special Invitation, Student Performance Evening." It was from the biggest music academy in the city, a place where only rich kids with private tutors and shiny instruments studied. She had never been there before, and she didn't know anyone who studied there either, so when she opened the envelope, her first thought was this must be a mistake, but it wasn't. Her name was written clearly, spelled right. No doubt it was meant for her. She had shown the letter to her school teacher, who raised an eyebrow but smiled politely. "Maybe someone noticed your talent," the teacher had said. But her voice didn't sound fully convinced. Eliza didn't say it out loud, but deep down she had a strange feeling about it. She remembered how some students in her school had laughed when she played piano during music class. They didn't laugh because she was bad, but because she was different. Her piano was old, her shoes were torn, and her clothes never changed much. She was the quiet girl who sat alone during lunch and left quickly after school. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the invitation. Something inside her, a small brave part, told her to go. It said maybe this time would be different, maybe. The music would speak louder than the whispers behind her back. So she packed her mother's old sheet music, the one with pencil marks and faded corners. She wore her usual gray dress and a cardigan that had been stitched too many times. She brushed her hair neatly and took the bus across town. The academy looked like a palace, shiny windows, clean marble steps, and a fountain that danced in the middle of the courtyard. When she stepped inside, her shoes squeaked softly on the polished floors. She felt eyes on her, some curious, some amused. A group of students nearby nudged each other and whispered, their laughter low and cold. They wore designer clothes, and some held tablets or shiny music cases. Eliza clutched her worn folder tighter and kept walking. She didn't know where to go, so she followed the signs toward the performance hall. The hall was huge, with high ceilings and velvet curtains. It smelled like fresh polish and old wood, a mix of something grand and distant. In the corner near the side wall stood a smaller piano, unused, dusty, forgotten. Eliza slowly walked to it and sat down. Her heart still nervous, she pressed one key, then another. The sound was soft but real. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move gently. It wasn't a full song, just bits and pieces she remembered. Music she had played at home when her mother was alive. Music that helped her feel safe when the world felt too big. What she didn't know was that someone was watching. Not one of the laughing students, but a girl with short hair and kind eyes. She had entered the room for practice but stopped when she heard the music. There was something about it, not perfect, not loud, but full of emotion. It wasn't like the polished pieces other students played to impress judges. This was different. It felt like someone talking through the piano. The girl stood there quietly, listening, her head slightly tilted. Eliza didn't notice her. She just kept playing softly, lost in her world, in her mind. She wasn't in a fancy music academy. She was back in the small living room where her mother sat nearby, where the window stayed open and birds chirped in the background, where music didn't need to be impressive, it just needed to be honest. That's how Eliza played. Every note was a part of her. She didn't know anything about impressing people. She only knew how to tell the truth through music. When she finally stopped, the room was still. She looked up and saw the girl smiling gently at her. "You're not on the list," the girl said softly. "But you should be." Eliza blinked, unsure what she meant. The girl walked closer. "That was beautiful," she said. "You should play tonight." Eliza's heart skipped. Play? On stage? In front of all these people? She shook her head quickly. "No," she whispered. I wasn't really invited, I think. I think it was a joke." The girl looked at her for a moment, then said, "Then let's turn their joke into something they'll never forget." Eliza didn't reply, but something inside her shifted. Something small and brave stood up again. For the first time, she thought maybe her music wasn't just for herself. Maybe tonight, it could speak for her louder than words ever could. And just like that, The evening began not with laughter, but with quiet hope. Eliza sat on the edge of the piano bench, unsure of what to do next. The girl who had spoken to her, Lily, stood nearby with her arms folded. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't staring the way others had. She just smiled. Gently, like she knew something Eliza didn't. "Come with me," Lily said, waving for her to follow. Eliza hesitated, holding her folder tight against her chest, but then she got up quietly and walked beside her. They stepped out of the corner and into a hallway full of color and sound. The academy buzzed with excitement. Students with glossy instruments moved back and forth, some practicing in corners, others whispering lines of lyrics. There were posters hanging on the walls with names of performers and judges. Eliza's name was nowhere on them. Of course, Lily walked quickly, her boots clicking against the floor. Eliza tried to keep up, her old shoes making no sound at all. They stopped at a tall wooden door marked "Backstage." Inside, a few students were tuning their instruments or checking their appearance in the mirror. Everyone looked so confident, like they belonged here. Eliza shrank back a little, but Lily reached for her hand. "You're going to play tonight," Lily said, her voice calm but firm. Eliza shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, I can't. I wasn't supposed to be here." Lily nodded. "I know," she said. "But you're here anyway, and they need to hear you." Before Eliza could reply, a tall man in a black shirt walked in, holding a clipboard. He looked strict, like someone who didn't smile often. "What's she doing here?" he asked, pointing at Eliza. "She's not on the program." Lily stepped forward without hesitation. "She's playing now," she said confidently. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her boldness. "Is this a joke?" he asked, looking between them. "No," Lily replied. "You'll want to hear her." Eliza stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't used to anyone standing up for her, especially not like this. The man sighed and said, "Fine. We have one open slot before the break, but if she messes up, I'm pulling her off." Lily nodded. "She won't mess up." The man turned and walked away, mumbling something under his breath. Eliza looked at Lily, her hands shaking now. "What if I can't do it?" she asked quietly. Lily gave her a soft look. "You already did it once today," she said. "Just do what you did at that little piano." Backstage, Eliza sat quietly in a chair, waiting for her turn. Her knees bounced with nerves, and she held her mother's music sheets like a lifeline. She thought about leaving, about slipping out the back door and forgetting the whole thing. But then, she remembered her mother's voice, soft and kind. "When you're scared, play." Her mother used to say, "Let your fingers speak for you." The lights outside dimmed, and the host's voice echoed through the speakers, one by one. Students walked out and performed violin, guitar, voice, all sharp and perfect. The crowd clapped politely, some songs more popular than others. Then, the host announced the next name, a name that wasn't on the program, and now, a Tinko special performance. "Please welcome Eliza." There was a pause, some murmurs in the audience. Backstage, Eliza stood slowly, her feet feeling like they were made of stone. She walked out onto the stage, the light blinding her for a second. The room was packed rows and rows of people, staring at her. Her hands trembled as she sat at the grand piano in the center. It was beautiful, shiny, smooth, unlike the one at home or the dusty one in the corner. She looked out at the crowd, and in the second row, she saw them, the students from her school, the ones who sent the invitation, the ones who expected her to be a joke. Some were smirking, leaning back in their chairs like they were waiting to enjoy the moment she failed. She looked down at the keys, closed her eyes and breathed. Then, she started to play. The first few notes were soft, almost too quiet to hear, but then came the next, and the next slow, steady, full of feeling. The melody wasn't flashy or fast, it was simple, but it told a story, her story. The room grew quiet, the whispers faded, and even the smirk slowly disappeared. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by something they didn't expect. She didn't rush, didn't try to show off. She just played what she knew: loss, love, hope. Every note was a word, every pause a memory, and by the time she finished, the room was holding its breath. Eliza lifted her hands from the keys. The final sound faded into silence. For a moment, nothing moved. And then soft clapping began, growing louder, stronger. Applause filled the hall, not forced or polite but real. Eliza looked out again. The smirking faces were gone, replaced with something else. Some students looked surprised, some even a little ashamed. Lily stood near the side of the stage, smiling with pride. Eliza didn't smile back, not yet. Her hands were still shaking, but for the first time, she wasn't shaking from fear. She had been invited to be laughed at, but her piano had said everything she couldn't, and now nobody was laughing. Eliza stood at the gates of the music academy once again, but this time, she wasn't holding a fake invitation or feeling like a stranger. She was here as a student, officially accepted into the summer program. Still, her hands were sweating as she held the small suitcase with her clothes and music sheets inside. The campus was even bigger than she remembered. There were students from all over the country, all carrying instruments or talking excitedly. Some were confident, laughing in groups, already making friends. Eliza stood quietly, unsure where to go, until a woman with a clipboard called her name. She followed the woman to a dorm room, simple but clean, a bed by the window, a desk, and a closet just for her. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step into a new world, a place where she could be someone new. That evening, they gathered all the students in the main hall. Instructors introduced themselves, and students were asked to share their names and musical background. When it was Eliza's turn, she stood up slowly. "I learned at home," she said softly, "on an old piano." Some students glanced at each other, surprised, but no one laughed. The teacher nodded and said, "Sometimes the heart teaches better than any school." The next morning began early. Eliza joined a small group for her first piano workshop. Each student took turns playing while the others watched. When it was her turn, she sat at the shiny black piano and stared at the keys for a moment. She felt her old nerves rise again, but then she remembered what Lily had told her. "Just play like you're talking." She let her fingers begin, slowly, carefully, letting the music flow from her memory. When she finished, the room was quiet. The instructor stood up and said, "You don't just play notes, you share a piece of yourself." One boy, sitting across the room, raised his hand. "How did you learn that emotion?" he asked, genuinely curious. Eliza paused, then said, "I used to play for someone I lost." No one asked anything else after that. They just nodded. And the next student took their place. Days passed, and Eliza began to open up. She didn't talk much, but she smiled more. She started spending time in the practice rooms after classes. Sometimes she would stay until the lights dimmed. She tried different songs, wrote new ones, and even helped a younger girl who struggled with timing. One day, a surprise announcement was made. There would be a final performance at the end of the program. Every student could share one piece with an invited audience: family, teachers, and guest musicians. It was optional, but strongly encouraged. Eliza's heart dropped at the thought of playing on stage again, not because of fear this time, but because she wanted to get it right. She wanted to make it matter. That night, she sat by the window with her sheet music. She didn't want to play something flashy or complex. She wanted something real, something that spoke in her voice, not someone else's. So she picked up her pencil and began writing her own song. No fancy title, no big intro, just music that came from the quiet places in her heart. It took her 3 days to finish. Each night, she would sit alone, play it softly, and adjust the notes until it felt just right. She called it home, because that's what it felt like: warm, simple, and honest. On the night of the final performance, Eliza wore the same dress she wore the first night she played at the academy. It was a little faded now, but it still felt like part of her. Other students wore new clothes, styled their hair, and practiced backstage. Eliza stood quietly in the corner, holding her music and breathing slowly. When it was her turn, the room fell still, the lights dimmed, and she walked toward the grand piano under the spotlight. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. Her song didn't try to impress. It didn't climb high or move fast. It stayed close to the ground, like a quiet walk through memories. It spoke of old afternoons, of missed hugs, of lonely nights that were softened by music. By the end, the room was silent, not because they were unsure, but because they were moved. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the applause came slowly, then stronger. Some people stood again. Some wiped their eyes. Eliza looked out at them, and for once, didn't look away. She had played her truth, and they had heard it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Backstage, a few instructors waited for her. One handed her a card and said, "I'd like to speak to you about something." Eliza took the card and nodded, still feeling the music in her fingers. That night, she walked back to her dorm slowly. She didn't feel like a guest anymore. She felt like someone who belonged. The girl they tried to laugh at was gone. In her place was a musician, and her piano had led the way. The day after the final performance, Eliza woke up feeling different. She wasn't nervous anymore. She wasn't wondering if she belonged. For the first time, she felt like her music had given her a place in the world. As she folded her dress and packed her things, she looked around the dorm room one last time. It wasn't her home, but it had become a part of her story. Her bag was light, just clothes, her pencil, and a folder full of handwritten music. But something inside her felt full, like she was carrying more than she came with. Downstairs, students were saying goodbye, taking photos, and exchanging phone numbers. Some of them waved at her now, even came up to say, "You were amazing," or "I hope we meet again." She smiled politely, still shy but thankful. Each kind word felt like a quiet hug before she left. She met with the instructor who had handed her the card after the performance. They sat in a quiet office near the library. He poured her a cup of tea and spoke gently. "Your piece last night," he said, "was honest, powerful, and full of heart." Eliza looked down, not used to praise. He continued, "We run a mentorship program for young musicians who show something special, not just in skill, but in spirit." Eliza looked up, confused. He explained that if she was interested, she'd be paired with a professional pianist, someone who could guide her, help her learn, grow, and maybe even perform at larger events. It wasn't just about school anymore. It was about her future. She didn't answer right away. Her heart was racing again. Not from fear, but from surprise. It felt too big, too fast, like a dream trying to step into real life. But then she nodded slowly. "I'd like that," she said softly, and just like that, another door opened. Back home, her aunt was waiting on the porch when she arrived. She looked up from her knitting, eyes squinting against the sun. "You look different," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. Eliza just smiled. "I feel different." The old piano was still in the living room, dust on its edges, but the keys still waiting. She sat down and ran her fingers across them gently. They were a little stiff, but they still sang. She played her new song, "Home," and the house filled with the music that had taken her so far. A few weeks later, Eliza received a call from the academy. Her mentor had been chosen, a woman named Claire, who had performed all over the world, but believed in helping young musicians find their own voice. They would start with video calls, then meet in person when possible. The first time they spoke, Eliza was nervous again. She sat in front of the small screen, her hair neatly brushed, her hands resting in her lap. Claire smiled through the screen and said, "I saw your performance." Eliza's eyes widened. "I cried," Claire added. Not because it was sad, but because it felt real. That one sentence broke something open inside Eliza. They talked for an hour, then two, not just about music, but about life, about fear, about being quiet in a world that talks too loud sometimes. Claire didn't try to change Eliza. She only tried to help her become more of who she already was week after week. They practiced through calls. Claire would send Eliza recordings and exercises, and Eliza would send back her versions. Sometimes Claire would say, "Try again, but play like no one's watching." And Eliza would close her eyes and let the music speak again. One afternoon, Claire said, "There's a small concert in the city next month. It's for young artists. And I want you to be one of them." Eliza hesitated. "It's not a competition," Claire explained. "Just a space to be heard," Eliza agreed. Not because she wasn't scared, but because the fear no longer controlled her. She began writing a new song for the concert. It didn't have a title yet, but it carried all the feelings she couldn't explain, about being seen, about being brave, about turning pain into sound. As the concert day came closer, Eliza practiced more often, sometimes in the morning before school, sometimes late at night. Her aunt would sit nearby, knitting, listening in silence. One evening, she said, "You've grown into your music." Eliza looked up and smiled. "It's grown into me too." The concert was held in a small theater, not fancy, but filled with warmth. People of all ages sat in folding chairs, sipping tea, waiting for the performances to begin. When Eliza's name was called, she stepped out, her shoes tapping quietly on the wooden floor. She sat at the piano, looked out at the faces, and didn't feel small this time. She felt ready. She played her new piece, not to prove anything, not to impress, just to share. When she finished, the crowd didn't cheer loudly. They didn't need to. There was something better, silence that felt full, like everyone had been given something they didn't know they needed. And once again, Eliza knew her music mattered, because it didn't just speak for her. It spoke for anyone who had ever felt quiet and longed to be heard. Eliza sat backstage after her performance, hands still resting in her lap. She couldn't hear much, only the dull roar of applause that still echoed in her ears. People were still clapping when she stepped off stage, and some even stood, but Eliza couldn't fully believe it had happened. She stared down at her fingers, still feeling the warmth of the keys. Lily rushed up to her and gave her a soft hug. "You did it," she whispered. Eliza didn't answer. Right away, her voice stuck somewhere in her throat. One of the staff members passed by and paused. "That was you?" he asked, a little surprised. Eliza nodded slowly. He gave a short smile. "Well, you got their attention." She wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but it didn't feel bad. Outside in the audience, people were still talking, not about the students with the fancy guitars or loud performances. They were talking about the quiet girl in the plain dress who made the whole room go silent. Some asked who she was, where she studied, and why she wasn't already in the academy. Meanwhile, a man in the front row sat with his fingers folded beneath his chin. He had seen hundreds of students, maybe thousands, but something about Eliza's playing made him pause. It wasn't perfect, not in a technical way, but it was raw, full of truth, and it moved people in a way few young musicians ever could. He pulled out a card and quietly slipped it into his pocket. Backstage, Eliza stood to leave, thinking her part of the night was over. She just wanted to go home. She felt drained, not from fear anymore, but from all the feelings that had poured out of her. Her music had never had an audience like that before. She had always played in small rooms, mostly alone. As she reached for her old folder of sheet music, a voice called out, "Hey." She turned to see one of the academy students standing behind her. He wore a shiny jacket and had a microphone clipped to his shirt. "I liked your song," he said. "I didn't expect that." Eliza blinked, unsure what to say. "Thanks," she said softly. The boy scratched his head, awkward now. "Some people didn't think you'd come," he added. It wasn't really an apology, but it wasn't unkind either. Then another girl approached, this one dressed in a sparkly top. She smiled gently. "You were really good." Eliza's heart felt strange, like it was opening and shrinking at the same time. People who had once laughed were now being kind. She wasn't sure how to feel about that yet. Lily appeared again and nudged Eliza's arm. "There's someone you should meet," she said. Eliza followed her down the side hall to a quieter room where the man from the front row waited. He stood when they entered, tall and calm, with a notebook under one arm. "My name's Tom," he said simply. "I help with outreach and scholarships for students who might not always get noticed." Eliza nodded slowly, clutching her folder again. "I was moved by your music," he continued. "You didn't just play a song, you told a story." Eliza didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that about her playing before. He handed her a small card with a phone number and website on it. "We have a summer program," he said. "I'd like you to consider applying. Everything would be covered." She stared at the card, the words not quite settling in her mind yet. Tom smiled again, then added, "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it." Back outside, the performance night continued. Students returned to their seats. More acts took the stage. But a quiet buzz remained in the air about the girl with the music that made you feel. Lily walked beside Eliza. As they stepped out of the building later that night, the air was cool and the stars were out. "You were the best one tonight," Lily said, not as flattery, but as a simple truth. Eliza looked down at her shoes, then up at the sky. "I didn't know they'd listen," she said softly. "They didn't just listen," Lily replied. "They heard you." At the bus stop, Eliza sat on the bench and held the card in her hands. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then slowly, she smiled. Not because of the applause or the attention, but because, for the first time, she believed maybe her music mattered. She wasn't just the quiet girl in the back anymore. She was the girl who played a piano that spoke louder than words ever could. And deep down, a part of her knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, Eliza woke up before the sun. Her room was small, quiet, and full of early light coming through the window. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The folded card from the academy still sat on her desk, untouched from last night. She thought maybe it had been a dream. Maybe she didn't really play on that big stage. Maybe no one clapped, and no one stood, and no one smiled. But when she sat up, her heart reminded her, no. It happened. She was there, and they had listened. She stood, walked over to the desk, and picked up the card again. The words were still there, an invitation, a program, a chance. Something inside her stirred again. That small, brave voice that had taken her all the way to that stage. Downstairs, her aunt sat by the window sipping tea. Eliza lived with her aunt since her mother passed away. The house was quiet most of the time, full of memories and silence. Her aunt looked up and asked, "Did you go to that music thing last night?" Eliza nodded, still holding the card. Her aunt raised an eyebrow. "Did they laugh?" Eliza paused, then slowly shook her head. "No," she whispered. "They clapped." Her aunt didn't say much after that, just nodded and went back to her tea. But Eliza noticed something new in her eyes, something like surprise, maybe even pride. Later that day, Eliza went to school. She expected things to go back to normal. She expected to walk down the hallway and still feel invisible. But something had changed as she passed her classmates. A few of them looked at her differently. One gave a small nod, another even smiled. She wasn't sure if they were being kind or just curious. But no one laughed this time. During music class, the teacher asked if anyone had seen the performance. Night video online. A few hands went up, and then someone pointed at Eliza. "She played," one student said. Everyone turned, and Eliza felt her heart race. But the teacher smiled. "Well," she said, "maybe you'll play something for us next week." Eliza nodded, her voice too quiet to speak yet. By lunch, news had spread. The video had been shared on the school's group chat. Someone had recorded Eliza's performance. Now people were watching it between classes. Some even showed their friends outside of school. No one called her names. No one joked this time. Instead, someone said, "That was real music, at home." Eliza opened the laptop she used for school and typed in the website from the card. It led to the summer program, 3 weeks at the Music Academy, Classes with real musicians, daily practice, live concerts, and a full scholarship for selected students. She stared at the page, reading every word twice. Then she clicked apply. Her hands shook as she typed for the first time. She wrote about her music, how she learned from her mother, how she played to feel close to her again, how music was the only place where she felt like she truly belonged. She sent the application before she could change her mind. Then she closed the laptop and took a deep breath. Days passed, and Eliza kept to herself. She still played piano every night. The old one in the corner of the living room. Some keys were chipped, and the pedal stuck sometimes. But the sound still wrapped around her like a blanket. When she played, the world slowed down. The noise, the pressure, the memories, everything melted into the music. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. It was thick, with the Academy's logo on the front. She held it in her hands for almost a full minute before opening it. Inside was a letter. It said, "Congratulations." She had been accepted into the summer program, full scholarship included. Eliza sat down slowly, staring at the letter. She didn't cry, not right away. Instead, she smiled, a soft, quiet smile. Not because of the award, not because of the words on the page, but because, for the first time in her life, someone saw her music the way she always felt it. That night, she played for longer than usual. The house was quiet, and the piano filled every corner. The melody danced softly through the room. It wasn't a sad song, not this time. It was full of hope. Outside her window, the stars blinked in the sky. Eliza didn't need anyone's approval anymore. She had already spoken, and the world had listened. Eliza sat on the old park bench, her music notebook open on her lap. It was a quiet morning. Soft wind in the trees, the sound of birds nearby. She liked writing here, away from noise, away from people watching. It gave her space to think, space to breathe. Since the city concert, her life had shifted again. More people began to notice her music, not just friends, but strangers. Claire had shared a clip of her playing online, and it started spreading. People from different towns, different backgrounds, began messaging her. Some said her music reminded them of someone they lost. Others said it helped them cry, or helped them sleep after many restless nights. At first, Eliza didn't know how to handle all of it. She wasn't used to being seen. She had always felt invisible, but now, each message reminded her that being quiet didn't mean being small. One day, she got a call from a music charity group. They had watched her performance online and asked if she'd like to visit a local hospital, not to perform for a crowd, but to play for children going through treatment. Eliza didn't even hesitate. "Yes," she said gently. "I'd love to." A week later, she stepped into the children's wing of the hospital. The walls were painted with bright colors, animals, stars, and clouds. The air smelled of medicine and hand sanitizer, but there was still warmth. A volunteer walked her to the small music room, where a digital piano waited. There were 5 kids in the room, some sitting in wheelchairs, others with blankets wrapped around them. They looked tired, some pale, some quiet. But when Eliza sat down and smiled at them, something changed. She didn't say much, just nodded and began to play. She played the first song she ever learned from her mother, soft and slow, like a lullaby. Then she moved into a new piece, something light, something playful. The children listened with wide eyes, and some of them smiled for the first time that day. One little boy clapped after every note, even when the song wasn't done. Another girl leaned her head on her mom's shoulder, tears in her eyes. But they weren't sad tears. Eliza kept playing, one song after another, not because she was told to, but because she didn't want to stop. Afterward, one nurse came up and touched her arm gently. "You gave them something today," she said, "something medicine can't always give." That night, Eliza lay awake in bed, thinking about those small faces, how music had entered a room full of pain and filled it with peace. She knew then this was what she wanted to do, not chase fame, not perform in giant halls, but use her gift to help others feel seen, Feel comforted. Over the next few weeks, she visited more places, retirement homes, shelters, even schools for kids with special needs. She never brought much, just her notebook, a small keyboard, and her heart, but every time it was enough. She started writing more songs, ones that spoke of healing, of quiet strength. She named one Window Light, inspired by the way the sun had hit a sick child's face while she played. She named another Still Here, a song for those who had lost someone but kept going anyway. Claire continued to guide her, sometimes pushing her gently to take chances, sometimes reminding her it was okay to rest. "You don't have to rush to be someone," Claire said once. "You already are." One afternoon, Eliza received a message from the Music Academy. They were holding a student spotlight event and wanted her to be the final performer. This time, they weren't inviting her as an outsider or a curiosity. They were asking her to close the night as their guest of honor. She sat with the message for a long time, not because she was afraid this time. She just wanted to make it count on the night of the spotlight event. Eliza stood behind the stage curtain. She could hear the soft chatter of the crowd, the gentle buzz of excitement. But this time, she didn't feel small. She felt grounded. Like a tree that had grown from hard soil. When her name was called, the audience clapped before she even reached the piano. She walked slowly, calmly, and sat down under the spotlight. The piece she chose wasn't the loudest or most technical. It was simple, steady, like a heartbeat. She called it Quiet Fire because that's what she had become. Not loud, not showy, but strong, burning alive. The hall grew still as she played. No coughing, no whispers, just silence and music. And when the last note faded, the audience stood not out of habit, but out of feeling. Eliza stood too, bowed her head slightly, and smiled. She had come a long way from that dusty corner piano. The girl they had once tried to laugh at had become the one they now stood for. Years later, Elisa walked into the same music academy where her journey had started. The same wide halls, the polished floors, the fountain in the courtyard. Only this time, people knew her name, not as a joke, not as a surprise, just as a musician. She wore a long coat, her hair tied back, and in her hand was a small notebook. Inside were songs written over many seasons, some joyful, some aching, but all honest. She was invited that day not to perform, but to speak, to tell her story to the newest students in the summer program. As she stood in the auditorium, she looked at the sea of young faces. Some were dressed in new clothes, others more plain. Some held shiny instruments, while others clutched old cases like they were holding something fragile. She remembered being one of them, nervous, unsure, hoping to be seen but scared to be noticed. She stepped up to the small microphone and smiled. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said gently. Some students looked confused. Eliza continued. "The first time I came to this academy, it was because someone invited me as a joke." Whispers moved across the room, a few gasps. "But I came anyway," she said. "And I sat at a dusty piano in the corner." She paused, letting the silence settle in. "And I played like it was my only chance to be heard." Her voice didn't rise or fall like a performer's. She spoke like someone remembering something personal. She shared how she used to practice alone, how her music was the only place she felt safe, how it helped her through the loss of her mother, through the quiet nights, and how, on a night when she was meant to be laughed at, her piano spoke louder than any voice could. After she finished speaking, the room was still. Then someone clapped, and the rest followed. But Eliza didn't stand there for applause. She stood there to give something back. After the session, a girl approached her quietly, maybe 13 or 14. She had soft eyes and held a small keyboard case that had a broken zipper. She looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "Your story," the girl whispered. "It felt like mine, Eliza. Knelt slightly so they were eye to eye. Then I hope you'll let your music speak too," she said. The girl nodded, blinking fast. Eliza didn't ask her name. She didn't need to, because she saw herself in that girl. And that was enough that night. Eliza walked past the old practice rooms. The same rooms where she had once played until her fingers ached, where she had poured her heart into simple melodies. Unsure if anyone would ever care, she smiled as she passed one of them and heard someone inside practicing. A shaky melody, a little off in rhythm, but full of soul. She paused for a second, then moved on. Later that month, Eliza was invited to perform at a public concert honoring musicians who had made a difference in their communities. The stage was outdoors. Beneath warm lights and open sky, families sat on picnic blankets, some with small children bouncing in their laps. She wasn't the headliner or the star, but when she sat at the piano, the crowd hushed. She played one of her oldest songs, one she wrote when she still didn't believe in herself. And somehow, now, it felt different. It didn't feel like a cry for help. It felt like a hand reaching out, offering peace. After the performance, a man came up to her, holding a program in one hand. He looked a little older, with kind eyes and a familiar smile. "You probably don't remember me," he said. "I was one of the students that night you first played at the academy." Eliza looked at him, trying to place the memory. He nodded. "I laughed when you walked in, I'll admit it." Her breath caught, not in pain but surprise. "But when you played," he said, "I couldn't move. You made me think. You made me feel something I wasn't ready to feel back then." He paused. "And I'm sorry for how I was." Eliza didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, and after a moment, she said softly, "It's okay, I understand now." And she meant it, because her journey wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about the quiet power of music, how it reached people, even when words failed, how it helped heal, connect, and remind others they weren't alone. Years after the night they tried to laugh at her, Eliza had become more than the girl who survived it. She had become someone others looked up to, not because she was loud, not because she chased fame, but because she stayed true to her voice, a voice that spoke through keys, one note at a time, and in the end, that was enough to change everything.